I get up, time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
Inside the character blueprint, on the previous tutorial we have get hit. Now let's explore the damage type either the player character or the enemy is reacting when being attacked. The break hit data stems from the hit result of this function. And what it does is, the logic here determines the direction of which the character is taking damage. Launch the character in the air when doing a uppercut attack or a great uppercut attack. In layman's terms, launch or great launch attack. Or determines when the character is knocked back from a great forceful damage, such as when the enemy generates a kinetic swing from the hammer, so much so that the player is knocked from 5 inches from that enemy. The damage is how much the character takes, albeit low, medium, or high level of damage. To further estimate, low damage is 25%, medium damage is 50%, high damage is 75 or higher. Of course, that's my estimation. Your estimation may vary. Damage type is the type of damages characters take depending on how impactful the strike is. Launch type is for determining whether or not the character is launching from a specific attack or not. More specifically, the launch attack. Hit sound is used for playing in whatever sound you make when hitting a character, be it flesh or metallic. But I'm not going to explain everything about that because it wastes too much time. But But what I'm focusing on is the damage type. Which uses the select. These are the damage types: normal damage, heavy damage, launch damage, great launch damage, knockback damage, knockdown, front flying, stun, and counter damage.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in
What I have here is one, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 types of damage reactions, and with the select, which is the one we use for bullying, I can determine whether or not the character is taking the damage on the ground or on the air. Where these 8 select logic came from, actually, what I'm using for these 8 select logic is I'm using get is character in the air to determine whether or not the character is taking damage on the ground or on the air. And with this, I actually know how the character takes damage on the ground or air. So in addition to that, from the damage type, I also have the select logic here, which uses integers. And the integer that I use to determine and the character is reacting from the damage is the state parameter. What the state parameter does, it uses the amount of numbers that I implemented when the character is landing on the ground after taking damage on the air. For normal damage, the state parameter when landing on the ground after taking damage is 14. For heavy is 15. For launch, 16. For great launch damage is 17. For knockback is 18. For knockdown is 19. For front flying it's 20. For stun it's 21. And for counter is 22. those are the numbers acquired, especially when the enemy blueprint is using event force land to land on the ground after taking the specific kind of damage. If you don't know what force land is, it's simply a function used to land on the ground regardless of okay, I'm gonna stop here. This function enforces the player to reset everything after doing aerial actions or receiving damage in mid-air. And when using event on landed, the force land and is connected to this event here. What I did is use force land to connect to event on landed. That way it'll reset everything after, as I said, doing aerial actions or receiving damage mid-air. So yeah, that's basically the gist of it. Inside the enemy blueprint, this is where I overwrite event force land. Here I set up is character in the air. I leave that first because the enemy is not in the air, and it wouldn't make sense for the enemy to keep doing aerial things when landing on the ground. So after I set up the is character in the air boolean, I move on to the branch, which is equal to the state parameter. Now, as I said in the previous segment, the state parameter here determines the character reaction, especially when that specific character is being attacked mid-air. Since the state parameter is equal to 14, the enemy should normally land after taking damage. And more specifically, taking damage in the air. This is the animation for air normal damage. On the first animation, the character is at the start of taking damage in mid-air, like this. Then, in the middle of the animation, the enemy is still in mid-air after receiving damage at a much normal level. Then, at the end of the animation, the enemy is landing on the ground after recovering from the damage in mid-air. And keep in mind that the middle of this animation is at a constant loop. So if you want the enemy to use that animation until the enemy lands on the ground, you have to click this arrow here, then click loop. This way the animation keeps playing on that very same loop until he lands on the ground. And when using that animation, the start section name must be named land, like what I have here in this animation montage. All you have to do is click on this, then copy this and paste it. Or keyboard term, Control A, Control C, and Control V to paste. If you're confused, I'll tell you. Control A is to highlight the text. Then Control C is to copy that very same text. Control V is to paste that text onto the start section name of the play anim montage. And as for the rest, what I did here for the rest of these play animation montages is to use animations which I feel is appropriate for, say, normal damage. To be more specific, aerial normal damage, aerial heavy normal damage, or aerial launch damage. So what I'm using in this animation is the aerial heavy hit. It's pretty much the same I use for the normal aerial hit. To make things easier, I created a function called damageLand based on state parameter. Now if I double click, I can show you what's inside here. What this logic does is that it determines that the damageLand equals to the amount of state parameter that is presented. It utilizes the input, which is the brand, and the damage state parameter, which is the integer equal to, and the integer is the state parameter. Obviously, the default value is 0, but I can make changes to that. But that will be for a second. For the output, I added the pins true and false from the branch so that way we can determine whether it is whether the state parameter is equal to that amount. For example, if I want the enemy to normally land to the ground after recovering from taking the damage normally in mid-air, then all I need to do is to set the damage state parameter to 14. Which is based on the state parameter I have here within getHit function. Remember, whenever the character reacts to being attacked by another character, the state parameter activates and more specifically mid-air. And when the character recovers taking the damage, in midair, the character uses 14 state parameter to safely land on the ground. Now, if this is true, then the animation right here, replace it. However, if it's false and if the enemy is landing after recovering from heavy damage, then I'll use another damage land based on state parameter and change from 0 to 15. If that's true, then like the one I had before, I'll use land to fire up the animation when the enemy lands on the ground after recovering from heavy damage. If it's false, well, I'll just have to use different animations for recovering from the damage in the air or being knocked back or knocked down, whether on the ground or mid-air, but most preferably in air. Of course, that is my opinion. Your opinion may vary. For the next segment, I'm going to move on to the set hitbox and unnotified state. On the beginning part, I have cast to character blueprint, and what I did here is that I extracted 4 variables from the character blueprint. The radius, I extract the node and promote to a variable using that same name. For the start collision, end collision, and hit data, I do the same thing. Extract the node, then promote to a variable. 3 of these. Then after that, I expose all 4 of these new variables here. That way, I can make changes when using this unnotified state. When I'm done, I have to place a check mark to true to see whether or not the start hit collision is plausible. For the receive notified tick, I basically use collision tick as a better alternative to event tick in case something goes wrong, or that the collision tick, when using it on event tick doesn't operate the way I want it to. So yeah, in my humble opinion, this is a better alternative to it. On receive notify end, what I extract from character blueprint is clear hit characters array, and what it does here is it resets or clears the hit collision that's being activated, whether by the player character or the enemy character. If that specific character wants to do it again, he can. You just have to clear the collision first before anything else. Now, after I'm done with that, what I have here is simply child blueprints of the set hitbox animation notify state. Now if I click one of them, you can tell that this normal damage animation notified state is the child of set hitbox. What I'm saying is that it inherits the same capabilities as the set hitbox. And with that, I can make a lot of changes. For example, I can change from 0 to 750 or 1080. But for now, I have this. The rest of them are the same as the normal damage, but say for launch damage, I have to set it to the amount in which I want to, because I'm using this animation notify state to launch the character. Because for launch type, I have to set it to 2 to ensure that the character is taking damage and is launching in mid-air. So yeah, that's basically the gist of it. In this next segment, I'm going to show you an example on how I use these hit animation notify states for attack animations through the animation montage. I'll use this as an example from combo 1 to combo 6. From the start of this animation, I'm going to add notify state and use normal damage. Then, from this state, I'm going to adjust it to the end of the attack, like so. Then after that, I have to set the radius to 30, and with the skeleton tree I can identify which bone I'm using to hit an enemy. From the start of the collision, I'm using lower arm R, and the end collision, I'm using hand R. These two bones. For these other three, I use the same normal damage, except I have to change from lower arm R to L and hand R to L. This one, I leave it the same. If you're confused as to which skeleton to use, you can use the skeleton tree to determine which bone to use to hit someone in the game. For this animation, it's basically vice versa, and by vice versa I mean change lower arm L to R and hand L to R. Certain attack animations, like combo number 5, have a launch type. So, say I have normal damage, and I want to change from normal damage to launch damage. So I'm going to click this, then right click and replace notify state with launch damage. And since the player character is using his right arm, the start collision will be lower arm L, and the end collision should be hand L. So don't forget to type those down. For hit data, I have 2080 and I'm going to change it to 3090. Then the last part of the combo, I add a knockback damage. But since the player character is using the right hand to finish the combo, knocking the enemy back from a distance, the start collision should be lower arm L, and the end collision should be hand R. So let's test those out. See that? For certain attacks like special attacks, like the uppercut, I use the launch damage because the player is launching the enemy using his fist. Like this. When I hold the button, when I hold the button to launch with the enemy, this animation plays. And as you can see, both the default and uppercut are separate. If you want the uppercut to be separate from the default, you click this arrow and remove the link, and you should be able to use uppercut. And going to the player, as you can see here, within this animation notify, the section name says uppercut. So you have to make sure that the animation has the same word as this one in the hold button animation branch. So that whenever I press the attack button to launch, the animation plays. If you're wondering how I attack the enemy in the air, okay, I use the browse icon to search for this aerial attack, then I click it, and as you can see here, I have front flying damage. This is when the player attacks the enemy mid-air, and he is using his right hand to do so. So the start collision should use lower arm lower arm R, and the end collision should use hand R. Remember, use the skeleton tree to find these two bones right here. This is a follow-up combo, except the player is using his left hand to perform a follow-up combo attack. The start collision is the lower arm, and the end. The start collision is lower arm L, and the end collision is hand L. So be sure to put those in. And for the last two, I use both normal for the right hand and the launch for the left hand. For the very last part of the aerial attack, the player is using his right hand to knock the enemy down in mid-air, using the lower arm and hand R for start to end collision. So what I'm using here is the knockdown damage animation notify state. Now let's test that out again. There, it works. One last thing. If you want to know whether the player or the enemy is taking damage, this is the way to go, the print string. Now, what I did here is I used damage type to connect to in string, converting E damage type enum to the string. And it gives me this. So what I'm doing here is essentially debugging this function to see if it works. So let me play it again just to reinforce what I'm talking about. See? So yeah, that's how I continue from the get hit function, and by that I mean I continue using the function while, how do I put this? Delivering nuances. I don't know if that came out right. I mean, I could be wrong. But that's not the point. The point here is that this concludes my continuation of the damage system for both players and enemies alike. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel for future tutorials like this, and keep in mind that what you take and learn from me is yours to do with as you see fit. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your day.